the whole image of Aboriginal people is so distorted, and providing them with yet another vivid image of dysfunction, and that's what the intervention does, then allows the federal governments and state governments and various other vested interests to do as they've always done to the Aboriginal people. We know from some rare reporting in the Fairfax Press and the Sydney Morning Herald several years ago by Deborah Jobson and one other, that the Aboriginal people are underfunded, compared with white people, are underfunded by as much as $300 million. That education gets, as I pointed out in that one community in Northern Territory, something like half of what white children get. That the discrimination at almost all levels is set in stone. And this intervention is a massive distraction. And I only hope that the committee, the United Nations Committee, uses at least the strong language that it last used in 2005 to shame Australia in the international community.
You mentioned that great British legal fiction, Terra Nullius, there, and actually one of the recent experiences I had in January this year was seeing wonderful Aboriginal activist Jenny Munro doing a speech at one of the demonstrations protesting against Israel's massacre of the people of Gaza. And I was speaking to a Lebanese friend of mine afterwards. He'd never seen Jenny speak before, and I thought his summary of her speech was great. He just said, she was magnificent. And she was. But the connection, obviously, I think, between so many Aboriginal people and the sympathy and solidarity they feel for the Palestinians, that the whole terra nullius, or in the Zionist language, the land without people for a people without land, yet another fiction. And I wonder if you would perhaps like to move on now to talk a little bit more about the question of Palestine. I re-watched, as I suspect many people did, I re-watched your documentary, Palestine is Still the Issue, as the assault on Gaza, the massacre that took place there, broke out. And in a way, almost the horrors that I'd seen in your documentary all paled into insignificance by what I was seeing day by day on television as that assault went on. So rather than just talk about perhaps the most recent events, but your long history of solidarity with the Palestinians and how you feel about the issues going on there.
Well, I first went to Palestine over 40 years ago. I was a very young reporter. And it was like a lot of things in those days for me. It was part of my education. I'd gone loaded up with all the mythology of brave little Israel. And it's over a period of time, not immediately, but certainly when I first visited a Palestinian refugee camp, I think my consciousness was raised almost immediately. The similarity between all indigenous people and the Palestinians are the indigenous people of that part of the world. So the likenesses between the Palestinians and the Aboriginal people are quite exact in many ways. And all the historical dishonesty that has been applied to negating them almost as a people, to destroying their history, is almost interchangeable. I mean, if you go back to, let's just go back to 1947, the propaganda then, the early Zionist propaganda, shortly before the creation of the State of Israel, was to deny that the Palestinian people existed. very similar in this country, even though there they were. I remember going to and staying on what was then called a socialist kibbutz, and there was a socialist Zionist movement. It's become very confused over the years and pretty well died away, I think. But here were all these good people in the kibbutz toiling away and sharing all their produce and sitting down at night and talking about the great European Jewish tradition as it was of opposing tyranny and so on and so forth. And in the distance you could see these sort of silhouette figures. And I said, well, what about them? Yes, and a kind of angst immediately set in. These were the Palestinians. These were the Palestinians toiling outside the kibbutz. These were the Palestinians who were actually cleaning the cabins in this socialist experiment, this kibbutz. These were the invisible people. I mean, that sort of situation you would have anywhere in the world. In Latin America, the same would be said of indigenous people, say in Ecuador and Bolivia. They were invisible. In fact, they call themselves invisible people, still as a kind of ironic mockery. Certainly it's true in Australia. Those who managed to wrench some kind of treaty, however inadequate, out of their various conquistador, such as the Maoris in New Zealand, weren't quite invisible because they had to be dealt with, albeit dealt with in a very manipulative way, but they had to be dealt with. And it was only later, when the Palestinians, having tried to deal on a peaceful basis with the Israelis, it was only later, and that failed, that of course the first Intifada began. Israel, this latest assault on Gaza, has nothing to do with Hamas. It has nothing to do with the breaking of ceasefires. It has nothing to do with rockets falling on what used to be Palestine, in towns what used to be Palestine. It is everything to do what was declared 61 years ago, and that was the cancellation of Palestine's right to exist. We are being beaten over the head with this mantra of Israel's right to exist, when the issue is the diametric opposite. It is Palestine's right to exist. 61 years ago, David Ben-Gurion and the various forces of then the incipient Zionist state, such as the Haganah, the Jewish Army, and others, set in motion what was called Plan B. And Plan B in 1947 was the destruction of 369 Palestinian villages and the expulsion or the extermination, the ethnic cleansing, and that term was used, of the population of those villages. They were critical villages. When people fly into Tel Aviv, they fly into an airport that is actually right next to where one of these villages were. The people long expelled, killed, got rid of. The same is true, of course, in Jaffa, which is basically was an Arab city. That Plan B has been Israeli policy since. Every war, and that's every war with Egypt, every attack on any country that Israel has mounted, its recent attack on Gaza, has been about taking more land grab. It's like our own land grab. They call it creating facts on the ground. And you've seen now in the aftermath of this Gaza assault, the building of these so-called settlements, really more and more of them, colonies. That has been the intention, that has been policy. Probably the most significant name for it has been is the Dagan plan. The president head of Mossad is Meir Dagan. Meir Dagan, who was Ariel Sharon's number 2 when Sharon assaulted Lebanon in 1982, devised not a terribly original plan, because it was David Ben-Gurion's before that, and that was to, as Jeff Halper recently described it, to warehouse the Palestinian people, to put them in not so much concentration camps, but actually warehouse them, to put them in these enclaves and to ignore them virtually, until they could either be forced to go, persuaded to go, or driven out.